Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Shaun Gove. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vic.
Oh, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it. Shaun, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm born and raised Washington. I like to camp and fish and dirt bike and hang out with the family and just love it here in the state. I'm a diesel mechanic. I've been turning wrench for a long time. Hobby of mine's building race cars and little things like that. I'm about 38 years old and just try to keep on top of living life, stress-free and being with the family.
Well, it sounds like you've carved out a good life for yourself. I'm impressed. How did you find out about the show, Shaun?
Well, my fiance was telling me after she wanted to go camping in the area we'll go over in this interview, and I told her, no way, I will never go camping there ever. And she explained to me about your show, your interviews, and your podcast, and it was actually her idea that I listened to a couple of them and write you my story and get a hold of you.
Well, I'm glad she did that. Thank goodness. Growing up, did you have an interest in cryptids and or things that go bump in the night?
Absolutely, yeah. I've always been fascinated with the supernatural. Never really seen any kind of bulletproof evidence that anything exists until the camping trip that we'll go over here pretty quick. I was like, we done the whole, go to like the haunted graveyards and, the amateur search for Bigfoot and never ever came up with any kind of evidence.
Yeah, well, as you know, that's normally how it plays out. Do you think your fascination in paranormal things affected your ability to deal with the Dogman encounters you would have years later?
Yeah, actually, I do. By that point in my life, I was always like, oh, this stuff may not exist. It may all be in your head. And then, man, like a 10-pound sledgehammer on the toe, man, I got a huge eye-opening. It is all real.
Yeah, I'd say you did. Your second encounter happened when you were on a camping trip. Before you tell us about your encounters, please tell us about the place where that second encounter happened.
All right, so it was up in Evans Creek. Tons of woods. It's just beautiful. Big trees, evergreens, what Washington State's known for most. It's very cold, gravel logging roads in and out, and it branches off with trails for ATVs, dirt bikes, and horsebacking. Our campsite wasn't really a campsite, it's just kind of like a place way up off the beaten path. So we took a gravel road up and then hooked off a trail and then 4-byed it out probably a good 2-3 miles, and we were way in the thick. We found a nice open area. Didn't look like it has been too used up. It was very, very peaceful seeming. It was very wet. A lot of the plant life has gone the wayside for the winter. All that was left are the big thick pines and a lot of dead brush. Everything was very wet and cold and damp. And then where we set our tent up, if you looked straight back, there's probably an open area to the rest of the mountain goes up. For the rest of the way to the peak, it's probably a good, 70 yards from our tent to the wood line where it goes up a steep incline. And then from our tent back to the the trail that we rode up from the logging road was probably a good 30 yards. We try to get off the beaten path as much as we can, be alone, just so we can just hang out with the guys, and no real wildlife threats, and all the bark was on the trees. The bears hadn't been making themselves well known. They probably still hibernating. A lot of the other wildlife, there was no signs of anything. It's just very cold and damp, and that's pretty much the layout of the area.
Well, besides the weather, it sounds like it was a pretty nice place, a good place to go camping.
Yeah, it's very quiet. Not many people up there, except for guys that like to ride quads and horseback and get out there on the ATVs and go four-wheeling. It's way off the beaten path. Many people won't venture out that far.
Huh. Well, that makes it even better. All right, Shaun, you've had 2 Dogman encounters. Please tell us about them now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
All right. The first Dogman encounter, it was actually before the tent incident. We were just driving out in Ravensdale, and a friend of mine who asked me not to use his name. We were driving down the Ravensdale stretch and from Four Corners out to Selleck, and right before you hit the Y, where it goes to the left, Selleck, and to the right would be like Canasket Palmer. We saw this deer like jump across the road, and the road is pretty wide. It's like 4 lanes wide, but it's only a 2-lane freeway with big shoulders. And you watch the deer come from the right side to the left side, jumped out of the woods, and it was like hop, like probably about just the end of the shoulder, and then it hops again, like halfway through the left lane, hops again, and it's almost off the road, and it hops off into the bushes. So 3 pretty good jumps at, deer, full-size deer running all out. It took that good couple jumps to get across that road. And the next thing you know, there was cars coming at us. So you could see the perfect silhouette of the deer. And then what happened next is mind-blowing. This thing, the Dogman, just jumps out of the woods, and it lands 1 foot in the center of this basically 4-lane freeway, and then hops again, and it's completely off the road. Like, basically just boom, boom, it's gone. I was mind blown. I couldn't figure out what to do. I wanted to turn and chase the thing because it ran straight down this gravel road. That's the turn to the left there. So I lock up the brakes because this all happened we're doing 60, and it's probably about 200, 300 feet in front of us. I slammed on the brakes past the gravel road it ran down, backed up and turned down there. And my friend was so freaked out, he grabs the e-brake and yanks the e-brake, and he looks me dead in the eyes, and he's all, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What's figured we'd go after that thing? Is it Bigfoot or Dogman or something?" And he goes, "I don't want no part of whatever that was." So he made me back up and leave. But we were both pretty worked up. I don't get as easily scared as he does, but it was pretty good that he probably did that, because it was a reality check that I usually don't get. I'm usually go for it and figure out what happens when the dust settles, and he's more like, "No, we just need to leave that be." But that was pretty much the extent of the first experience. It wasn't really, too much other than that. The second experience, we were camping up in Evans Creek. We never go camping there. We always go to, I guess the more well known would be Rainier, Paradise, but it goes Greenwater, Crystal Mountain, then Paradise and Rainier, Mount Rainier. And for some reason, back in 2005, the Washington State Forest Service roads decided that they didn't want ATVs to be using the Forest Service roads anymore in King County. So we decided to take our camping trip elsewhere. We went out of our comfort zone and we decided to head 60, 70 miles north to Evans Creek. It was pretty early in the season, just got done snowing, and we make it up all the way up the gravel roads. Once we get to Evans Creek, we take a branch off the gravel road and head down the non-beaten path to the campsite we chose. It was completely damp. Everything around was wet. We brought our own firewood. We didn't even think that we would even need to use the firewood, but we didn't plan on it raining that hard. But we started to get the fire trying to get lit, and it just wasn't happening. Even the kindling we brought, the wood we brought, propane torches, we just had absolute zero luck getting a fire started. And we showed up pretty late in the day because we got a late start. So we were doing all this about 3:30 in the afternoon, and anyone from Washington State knows it starts getting dark pretty early around here in the winter. It's pretty much light's all gone about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the winter. We needed to prioritize getting our tents set up, and about this time it's dusk. We're all cold and starting to realize this might have been a bad decision, but we couldn't turn back now. We were already committed, and my friend set up our tent, which seemed to be like the perfect spot, but none of us paid attention. Where we set it up was in a hole, and it was under this big pine tree, and we thought that the pine tree would keep us somewhat dry, a little bit out of the weather. And we set it all up, and we didn't pay attention that we set it up in a big hole. And for some reason, I can't figure out why that hole filled up with water when it wasn't there when we set it up. But about this time, our tent's all set up, still no luck getting the fire. We ended up eating cold hot dogs for dinner. We tried cooking them with the propane, little propane torch, and didn't work as well as we thought. We all decided to call it a night. It's probably pretty late about this time. We're up all night, joking around. No campfire, so we're using flashlights, and we're in the tent. It's still pouring rain. And we decided just to call it a night and get up early and do some riding. And we're probably all asleep about 11. And then it was about 2 in the morning. I was the first one up. I can't say why I woke up, or like I wasn't scared, just woke up, like no reason at all. And then I looking around and everyone's asleep from what I could tell. And to paint a picture, this place is so dark, you cannot even see your hand 5 inches in front of your face. There is no light. Absolutely nothing. And you can kind of feel dampness on the ground, which I was trying to explain earlier. It rained so hard, we set our tent up in a hole, and it became a mud puddle. It was probably about 3/8 to an inch deep in some areas, and I can't believe that we were all sleeping in that and didn't have any problem with it. It was cold. It was probably 38 degrees, just that perfect cold to where it's not going to snow, but it'll rain. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, I can't believe we set up our tent in this freaking mud puddle and it's pouring down rain and this is the most miserable camping trip I've ever been on. And then that's when things went from bad to worse. I thought I heard something, and then I was like, hey, what is that sound? It sounds like it's like 15 feet on the outside of this tent. And then I hear like a walking in a mud puddle, and it's like kaplunk, kaplunk, like when you step in a mud puddle that is deeper than your foot and the water goes over the top of it, it makes that kaplunk sound. And that's when I was like, oh, great, it's a bear, because it's not a wolf. A wolf, it would be light on its feet, like splash, 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 splash. Or a deer, you would hear the hooves. You know, it's something big. And then I really started to freak out because I was like, it's a bear. And then I started paying more attention. And this thing is walking closer to the tent. And this mud puddle that we set the tent up in, it probably went around past the tent, like 4 feet parameter of just water that we're sleeping in the middle of. I guess it kind of formed like a moat, I guess so to say. And whatever was walking, I'm listening, and it makes no sense to me because it's walking like a bipod, not a creature on 4 legs. It's heavy on its feet, and I'm listening, and it's by this time it's made its way close enough to the tent where I can hear it breathing. And I was so petrified, so scared for my life, not knowing what is keeping whatever this thing is from tearing through the tent and just mauling us. I was so scared that I couldn't even muscle up enough courage to move and try and wake up my friend who was just out of arm's reach. I listened to this thing circle the tent, and when I really started freaking out is I could hear it growling, which I'm still mind blown that my friends didn't wake up at that because it was such a deep growl that words cannot describe it. It had so much depth to that growl. And then you start overthinking things. You're like, that don't sound like a bear. Maybe it's a really big dog or wolf or coyote. But then you start thinking, everything in my mind is making it smaller. And our tent was a 4x10, 4-person tent. And it stood about 6 feet tall. And I remember sitting up, and my friends are all still asleep. And this thing is walking around the tent. And I let it do a lap and a half. And I could not figure out, the whole time, kaplunk, kaplunk. And it's sniffing the top of the tent. And that's where my mind was blown. If it was a bear, you think it'd be smelling like its head level would be the side of the tent. Like mid-range where I was sitting down, it should be at my shoulder or something. This thing is sniffing the tent at the top of the tent. And it's sniffing it, like growling, and then walk 2 steps and sniff a corner and growl, and then across the front of the tent, sniff the other corner and growl. And I'm sitting at the next corner, and this thing is walking towards me, and I could hear it getting closer, the footsteps getting louder, kaplunk, kaplunk, and it's at the top of the tent corner where I'm at, and I could hear it sniff, And man, my hair stood up on my neck, and I could hear it growl. And I don't know if it was just from it being at my corner of the tent, or if it really did this, but it growled, which seemed way longer than any of the other corners of the tent. Then it stopped, walked again to the other corner of the tent, and I was already pushed past my fear point of petrified. I had to do something. I woke up my friend, and I woke him up in a different way. I put my hand over his mouth, and I went down to his ear, and I was like, don't make a sound. There's something big outside, and it's circling the tent and growling. And he sat up. He woke up the buddy next to him after he heard it. And then he woke up our buddy next to him after he heard it, which I still, to this day, have no idea how those guys slept through that. And like, we were going to get up early and ride. We had done no drinking, no drugs, nothing. I could at least give him an excuse to sleep like that if we had, but we were stone cold sober. It's just one thing after another to get this camping trip on way. We didn't have time to have a beer, you know. And the whole time, this dog growling creature is circling the tent. I figured at least if my friends were awake, they could vouch that this isn't in my head. But what happened when I woke them up made my fear level go so much higher. They were all just as scared as I was, just as petrified. And this thing, whatever it was, kept walking around the tent. Kaplunk, kaplunk. And these footsteps, they were pretty far apart, man. They were, you know, like a human probably be like 4 steps to cross the 10-foot side of the section, you know, big long footstep strides. And this thing would do it in like 2.5. And we had guns on us, but for some reason I didn't think that it'd be a good idea to shoot whatever that thing was. And it was tormenting us, and it just kept circling the tent. And I don't know about most people, but with me, I never really got scared ever in my life. And to have 4 young adult men, we were all probably 22, 23 at this time. We're all bigger guys, you know, 6 foot plus, 250 pounds. We're all sitting in this tent, petrified, shaking, wishing we were anywhere in the world but there. We were what I call teary-eyed scared. We were so scared that we wished for anything other than to be there. We probably would have even rather died than to sit another second in that tent. This thing just kept walking around the tent and sniffing the top of the tent. And at this point, you can only take so much of being tormented where you're finally just like, I need to just end this situation, however it may be. When we camp, we all leave a pair of keys in the ignition of our trucks, and we all have a pair of keys on us. You never know what's going to happen when you're out riding. You can lose your tent, you can lose your keys riding. So I had spare keys in my pocket, and my truck had keys in the ignition. And I said to my buddy, after this thing has circled the tent for And Vic, it may have only been for 5 minutes, but when you're that scared, it sounds funny, but it seems like time lingers. That experience to us may have only really been about 5 minutes in actual time, but it seemed like days to us. That's how scary it was. And finally, we just came to the conclusion where I told my friend, hey, when this thing makes it to the backside of the tent and we're talking quietly and like, not like, you know, Mr. Tough guy quiet. I mean like scared to death, had the bejeebus scared out of you, you know, teary-eyed, scared for your life, talking quiet. I said, hey, when that thing gets to the back of the tent, open that tent door slowly and just peek out. And if you don't see nothing, which there was nothing to see, because like I said, it was so dark, you can't see your hand 5 inches in front of your face. All we heard was splashing from this thing's foot or feet in the water and the sound of a growl at the top of the tent. There's no seeing nothing. Nothing. There's clouded over skies. There's no lights in the woods. There's not even so much as a star or moonlight or anything. It is pitch black. I hear my friend opening the tent. I can't even begin to imagine how he even found the zipper. It was so dark. I'm just focusing on the noise of the zipper moving. And he said the coast is clear. I beelined it for the truck as fast as I could. I don't know what I was thinking, because I just wasn't thinking, I guess is the honest truth. Any predator wants you to run. And what did I do? I ran. Probably the dumbest thing ever. But in my mind, I figured I have a key in my pocket to my truck. There's a key in the ignition to my truck. If whatever this thing is gets me, at least my friends get away. And I'm running, looking back over my shoulder. No noise, no sound of footprints. I'm in my bare feet. It's cold. The ground's rocky. And believe me, I think I'm running 200 miles an hour, but I could have probably walked faster because of how bad the layout of the land was. Bare feet, wet, gravel. By some miracle, I hit the alarm button to my truck. The lights go on. The doors open. I jump in the truck, and the whole nose of the truck is aimed at the tent. I turn on the headlights, and I see the tent. And there's this thing behind it, standing bigger than the tent. And it crouches down. And at this point, I lost it. I didn't know if whatever that thing was ripping out the back of the tent and getting my friends in there. I started my truck. I drove it right up to the tent. Just, you could feel your heart beating in your neck. The adrenaline and the fear, just, there's no explaining it. You're teary-eyed, scared. You don't know what's happening. You're just going through the motions. I get to the tent, and then finally, there's just like a subtle relief. I can see this thing tearing across the clearing behind the tent. So I knew it was leaving. But then the weird part after all was this thing circled our tent on 2 feet. And the way it's running away is down on all fours. And the way it ran, it would like bring its front legs or arms way behind its back, and it would like grab the front ground and pull it almost like a gorilla kind of, but it moved so stinking fast. It probably cleared that 70 yards in a matter of 2-3 seconds. It was gone. Started heading up the mountain. By this time, I mean, like I said, when you're scared, and sometimes it takes longer to explain a memory than it actually happened. I get to the tent in the truck, kick the door open, my buddies jump in. We are so scared to death that we left our quads, all of our camping gear, everything there, and we left. We never ever have any intentions of going back there, not to sleep in a tent or even stay the night. We have spent, it's 2005 and it's 2019 now, so 14 years. I could probably count on one hand the people that we have told this story. But after we all got in the truck, we left. And we drove down those logging roads like this thing was chasing after us as fast as I could safely get down the logging roads, through the trail, down the logging roads, to the main highway. Once we hit that main highway, we just full throttle. I didn't even stop at the nearest gas station. I kept pushing. I put about 40 miles on us before I even pulled the truck over and before we gathered our thoughts and talked about it. And one thing I left out of the story was the smell of that thing. It's a smell that words cannot describe it. I mean, everyone's smelled wet dog. They've heard what bears smell like. This creature had a smell that was so pungent, it almost burned your nasal cavities, like pneumonia. It smelled like wet dog and cat urine. It was very undescribable smell, which I have done my best to try to describe. We ended up having to pay some of our other friends to go get our gear and our quads, and we have no intentions of ever going back to Evans Creek ever. Like, that thing, whatever it was, it could have had no problem coming through that tent, and it definitely would have had absolute zero problem chasing down the truck. It would have had no problem jumping over that tent and mauling me. Whatever it was doing, it definitely made it very clear it didn't want us there. That creature just sounded so pissed off that we were even there. And there was no campers for miles, no fires, no way to start a fire. It was the perfect storm to just the worst camping trip ever. And to this day, 14 years later, we don't talk about it. it's almost like I can count on one hand, and that includes you, Vic, of the people I've told this story to. A couple times we've told the story. My buddies were there with me, and a whole room of people didn't believe us. They shunned us. They made fun of us, all for telling the truth. And we found out the hard way that some things people are just not ready to hear about or don't want to believe it exists. But us four guys are telling you this creature does exist. And we will never go camping in a tent again, especially in Evans Creek.
Well, I can't say I blame you. Please describe for us as accurately as you can the creature you saw that night behind your tent.
Yeah, okay. It was very tall. Like I said, it was perfectly centered behind the tent. And the tent would go up like 6 feet. And I could clearly see it's so, like I said earlier, I was about 60 yards from the tent. I could see the creature in the tent. And when I hit the lights on it, I mean, full lights, like KC lights, headlights, fog lights, every light was on the truck. I could see the tent. I could see the tree that we were under. It had been limbed up about 8 feet. And this thing, its head was up in the tree branches where it had been limbed up like 8 feet. And then you could see its neck, its shoulders, its chest, and then there was the tent down. But when that thing ducked down, it didn't have no face alike. It looked like a wolf. It wasn't exactly like a brown, but it wasn't like a dark gray either. It was as black as the night was. It was completely black, and I didn't see its eyes. They didn't reflect with the lights like a cat's does or anything like that. It was probably only for a split second that I turned that light on, and it was just standing there, and then it crouched down really fast, but it was huge. It towered completely over that tent, completely over it by like 2 or 3 feet. And it is very, very big, very muscular. Like it was soaking wet, just completely wet. Like if its fur looked like if you hosed down like a black, I'm trying to think of it, like a black long-haired dog. If you just let it go out in the lake or the river and it comes back and its hair is just that wet, dripping water, that's how wet this thing was. And the way it ran, its back like tapered towards its hips. It wasn't big and round like a bear, but it was, that's the best I could describe it, man. It was 100%, looked 100% like, I don't know if you're familiar with that game, Skyrim, but they have like a werewolf mod on there, and that's the most accurate I can say that I have seen. And I've seen all the Dogman movies, all the Howlings. I've seen tons and tons and tons of drawings and all the Van Helsings, and the most accurate description from what I've seen is that Skyrim, that game that my fiance plays is how it runs, how it stands. It just, its face and head were considerably smaller than the game makes it, but still very big. Like, I can imagine that this thing would have, no problems just being at the top of the food chain. And there's nothing in my mind that could even come close to, going toe to toe with one of these. Even like a grizzly or Kodiak bear, I don't think would even want to mess with this thing. It just, the way it ran, the way it sounded, it just has that fear. It just stabs that fear right in your back, and it don't go nowhere. And it's pretty hard to do that. Like I've seen bears, Kodiak bears up close, big ones too, like big ones, and they didn't put the kind of fear in me that this thing did. And going back to what you were talking about earlier about paranormal, you see a bear, you know it's a bear. You see a wolf, you know it's a wolf. You see this creature, everything that I have went and looked for, paranormal, went and searched for, does it exist? It does exist. It was staring me dead in the face at 60, 70 yards away. Like, here I am. I'm everything that you looked for, your biggest fears, is right here standing in front of you. It's like you said, Vic, you are told that these creatures, these monsters, they don't exist. You're brought up, you're bred that way. You're go in the woods, there's nothing to fear. The bears will leave you alone. The wolves and the coyotes, they'll stay clear. Just build a fire. That's what anyone will tell you. Build a fire. The one time we couldn't get a fire started, when you make visual of that thing, you realize 100% monsters do exist. There's one right there. And that realization will make your stomach drop. It'll drop clear to your ankles. It's a feeling that is not good. It's like getting slapped in the face with reality, but not the kind of reality to where, I got to pay my bills this month, or they're going to turn my electric off. It's like a reality, like everything that you fear is live and it's out there. And I can't believe that these things haven't been spotted more, or maybe the people have seen them. They're just scared to come out and tell everyone what they've seen, because I've been there, man. The people, they don't want to believe this stuff. And it's a hard pill to swallow. And when you do, when you smack dab see it, it totally changes your whole outlook on life.
Oh, sure it does. Yeah, like you touched on just a bit ago, when you're raised being told that monsters don't exist, and then one day you see something like what you saw, yeah, that's going to have a really big effect on you. Speaking of the effect that experience had on you, you've had some big problems with nightmares because of those experiences you had. Please tell us more about that.
Yeah, the just horrific nightmares of that thing actually coming through the tent. I've had nightmares just so descriptive, and you wake up just in a cold sweat, and thank God that you're just in your bedroom and you're not in that tent. And it's hard to live with because you can't tell people why you're a grown man having nightmares. It's just, and then you try and tell your kids, the same thing that you were told, there's nothing to be scared of in the dark. And here you are having nightmares. But the nightmares I've had of one very descriptive nightmare back in the tent. It's cold and it's everything. Like I said, the whole story plays out the same in my nightmare, except for when I hear the zipper opening. It's not my friend opening the zipper, and then I actually still try to beeline it out the tent door, and I just freaking run right out the door into that thing, and that just make the hairs stand up on your neck. Wake up just scared. Other nightmares I've had at my house, some of them make absolute zero sense, but they're still related to that experience. Had one where it wasn't black, it was all white, and I could hear this, like, when back the people would run their fingernails across the chalkboard. I would hear that, and I'm walking around my duplex in in Auburn, and I'm walking around and I'm looking and I can't find nothing, can't hear where the sound's coming from. In my dream, for some reason, whenever the lightning would flash, it would show where this creature was at. And the lightning flashed, and it was sitting there with my picture windows in my old apartment. They're probably 12 feet tall, and it looks out the backyard. And when the lightning flashed, this thing was standing there with its arms up, and it was just dragging its claws down the glass. And just stuff like that, like nightmares of it chasing us down the hill in the truck, on those logging roads. When you're out four-wheeling, sometimes you can walk faster than you can actually make it through the trail in a truck, and pretty much end up being sit and pray for something like that if it wants to get you. And just dreams of that thing ripping the doors off the truck, or ripping the tailgate off, or jumping up on the hood. Just a whole bunch of nightmares like that.
You've had a rough go of it because of that experience. Yeah, that's not an easy one to get over. You said you and your friends had guns on you. What kinds of guns did you have?
Usually we all pack handguns, sidearms. I carry a .45 1911, and both my other buddies, one had a 9mm, and then the other one just had a little plinker 22. But anyone knows that those guns, even the forest ranger will tell you, even if it's a black bear, any of those guns are just going to really make it mad. So this thing, if those just make a little black bear mad, I couldn't imagine what it would even begin to do to this. So they're just probably better off just throwing it at it and running than actually shooting it or at it.
You might as well have had Red Ryder BB guns on you.
Yeah, from what I've been told, I've heard stories of some of your stories, in fact, of interviews you've done with other gentlemen that have taken shots at one with the .06, and man, didn't even phase it. And that a .45 was the biggest we had on us, and that don't have nothing near a 30-06 for dropping power.
Oh, no doubt. At one time, you had plans for buying a property in the country. How'd that experience affect that?
It 100% affected it. like I've always wanted a piece of property that backed a wooded area or mountainside. It's just always been a dream of mine to have, but I don't know, like fears, like I still live in Washington State, and realistically, my experience is it's less than 100 miles from where I actually live. And all the properties I want are closer to that area. And I don't know if those things remember scents. I just don't want nothing to do with it. I don't want to put my family in that kind of harm's way. I live in the middle of a city, and I don't have no property. And to this day, when my friends and I all go riding, we get there, even if it's just to go up in the woods and target practice or shoot guns. We get there when the sun's fully up, and we leave before the sun even comes down. So after that experience, I don't want anything to do with owning property next to. I kind of viewed it as putting my family in harm's way.
Well, I don't blame you for feeling that way after having an experience like that. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Shaun, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would just let people know that these things are very, very real. And even though we all made it out and didn't come a lick of hair harmed on us that night, it's still a traumatizing experience that I don't wish upon anybody. And I would just say, if you don't want to experience something like that, then I would just stay clear of the woods. Like those monsters are out there and they're for real, and they apparently are very territorial. I think that we posted up camp in this thing's territory, and it was just warning us to get out of there. I would say if you still venture out to the woods, which my family and I do, I would just go during the day and leave before it gets dark, or, just stay in something other than a tent.
Like a Winnebago, or even better than that, an M1 Abrams.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, sounds like that would be a good move. Well, Shaun, thanks again for coming on and sharing all those experiences with us. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thanks again so much. Have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.